You know, endings can be a colossal pain. It doesn't matter how hard you try, something always gets sacrificed for the sake of the conclusion. Character arcs may get rushed or abandoned. Plot points risk being overtaken by themes and spectacle. And all too often, continuity is more of a suggestion than a requirement. Yet despite these conundrums, there is endless debate over a story's merits. What may be a golden example for some is a cataclysmic failure in the eyes of others. It's a crude balancing act trying to bring a story to its end. Perhaps that explains where the problems stem from. For several years, the topic of Zodiark had very little in the way of substance. By the time Stormblood was winding down, we were at 3 whole games and still barely had a few spark notes worth of information to work with. Not exactly riveting stuff. All we knew was what Hydaelyn had told us back in Heavensward. That he was a dark god who existed before life began, craved power and had his essence split up and sealed away as a result. And now his followers, the Ascians, seek to undo his banishment and make his being whole again, resulting in all manners of upheaval and borderline apocalyptic machinations. Fairly cut and dry villainy, to be frank. Something that wouldn't be out of place in our Saturday morning cartoons. Then Shadowbringers came along and flipped the board. In the best ways possible, I would argue. It was during that expansion, after all, that we learned the actual truth. The truth being, Zodiark was never a tyrant, but a savior, a final weapon intended to safeguard the world in the face of annihilation. The Ascians weren't blind fanatical followers, but the remnants of that civilization that created him, people who had been robbed of everything they ever knew, and were desperate to get it back, no matter the cost or how long it would take. It was a phenomenal tale that reshaped the very world we had been a part of for so long. Not only did Shadowbringers reset the stage, it also set up the finishing act with Endwalker. In our multiple conflicts with the Ascians, we had seen firsthand the extent of their knowledge and power, the insurmountable odds stacked against us, making our eventual victories all the sweeter, all the more earned. These experiences provided the perfect concoction of threats to put Zodiark into a perspective we could all understand and take to heart. This entity, despite some similarities, was unlike anything else we've ever faced. Not Xenos, not Shinryu, not the Ascians themselves could hope to compare to such an encompassing power. Endwalker was intended to be the final chapter in the saga. Here we have the rogue Ascian, Fendaniel, seeking to use Zodiark's imprisoned husk as a weapon to see the world not preserved, but obliterated. We, as a warrior of light, track him down to Zodiark's prison on the moon. But we were too late. The nihilistic Fendaniel evades us and seizes the body of the ancient's dark god for himself. And thus, the scene is set. The battle is unavoidable, and given everything we have discussed in this opening, there could be no chance for victory in a straightforward fight. I mean, there couldn't be, right? So, no doubt, we will require ingenious solutions to this challenge. In many of our conflicts in the past, we have utilized unique and creative tools to give ourselves the advantage. Talismans to suppress tempering, tools to puncture enemy defenses and avoid devastating attacks. So perhaps it will be through ingenuity that we find a solution, even to an opponent such as this. Regardless, whatever happens next, it's bound to be an extravagant and unparalleled experience. Wait, what just happened?
Incomplete and insufficient. Of course he was no match.
Are you freaking kidding me?
Once again, you left my best laid plans in ruins.
Okay, wow, they are not kidding, that's really it. After all that buildup, all that hype and anticipation, that's what this boils down to. Incomplete and insufficient. Sweet merciful Hades, where do we even begin? Who in their right mind possibly thought that this was a good idea? Try and understand, people, this opponent we just drop-kicked is many orders of magnitude beyond anything else we've ever faced. An entity that's been hyped up and teased for literal years and across multiple expansions. Zodiark didn't just prevent the end of the world, he didn't just maintain that sphere of protection after he was sundered and imprisoned. He was the first primal, born from an astronomically powerful civilization. Half of the ancient world's peoples alone were used to provide fuel for his creation, peoples whose strength and spiritual potency far surpasses anything we have in the present. And that's just on the individual level. It's impossible to put in the proper words the scale we're dealing with here, because there simply isn't anything on par for comparison. That is the sort of enemy we are squaring off against. Zodiark rightfully should have been our most grueling enemy by far, by any metric. All of the evidence, including our own accomplishments and shortcomings, made it awfully clear how unmatched we were for this encounter. But instead we beat his ass, unceremoniously. For crying out loud, we're not even down on one knee panting from the exertion. No scars, no bruises. This is hardly a satisfying finale. And all we get for an explanation is some throwaway line that Zodiark is still incomplete. Somehow that's meant to satisfy, never to be questioned or scrutinized in any meaningful way again for the rest of the narrative. I can honestly say that I wasn't sure what to expect when the Zodiark trial was dropped on us. But this wasn't it. So it's important that we establish just how senseless this victory of ours really was. So senseless, it's laughable to the point of projectile vomiting one's spleen all over the keyboard. That cannot be healthy. Nonetheless, I am determined. Let us begin, starting firstly with what Fendaniel himself argues.
Incomplete and insufficient.
That, along with the Asm Crystal allowing us to summon help and even the odds, is why we were able to best him. Clear and simple. Yeah, no, not at all. This doesn't begin to explain what we just witnessed. Again, Zodiark was born from who knows how many thousands of unsundered souls. Even divided himself, his mere existence kept the planet shielded from the final days. We have seen what members of the ancient world were capable of. The intro already established the sort of threat we should expect from this fight. Something of this caliber getting bested simply because they're incomplete drastically belittles their powers and abilities, all for the sake of a convenient explanation. Look, superficially, I get the idea. Zodiark isn't exactly in top form here. Only has one wing. I wonder if that was intentional. Missing some limbs like a butchered necromorph. Sweet mother of holy hell, his torso is being held together by literal magic. It is not a pretty sight. If we focus on physical appearances, I bet many players would wager Zodiark is at a colossal disadvantage. But it's just that. A physical observation. One that can hardly stand up to scrutiny. Basic math can prove how ridiculous this is. There's been 7 rejoinings by now. That would make Zodiark 814s complete. That's approximately 57%. Now consider everything he should be capable of at 100%. Shielding the planet, rejuvenating the world, tempering the Asians into his service. They alone are quite formidable, mind you. The very fact that we interact with the disembodied souls that created Zodiark, stuck in some perpetual limbo, should be evidence of the insane transcendental nature of this opponent. 57% of an almighty superweapon shaped like a cosplay enthusiast is still 57% of an almighty superweapon shaped like a cosplay enthusiast. It's hilarious to argue this being a fair fight just because Zodiark is only, quote-unquote, a little over 50% complete. This is like saying that 57% of a nuclear bomb's potential yield blown up in your face is not a life-threatening situation. No, you're still water vapor. No amount of plot armor will save you like that stupid refrigerator scene from Crystal Skull. Fendaniel's so-called rationalization is a colossal disservice to Zodiark's strength. This outcome requires far more than a few hastily written lines to justify. Incomplete and insufficient. The only thing incomplete and insufficient here is this explanation. So, to the game's credit, it does try and provide us with a second argument, following here.
From the first, all I wanted was for you to kill Zodiark.
Ah, very good. The villain boasts that he used us to destroy Zodiark for him. He desired to rub our own strength in our faces, as we unwittingly helped kickstart the apocalypse. We were just pawns for his sadistic convenience. Zodiark's destruction was a plan all along. And okay, that's a bit better. Our enemy manipulated us to achieve his desired goal. That's a pretty sweet twist. It still doesn't make a lick of sense though. Even for a psychotic nihilist, Fendaniel wasn't a mental moron. Just a catastrophically annoying moron. He knew very well he could have simply used Zodiark to destroy Zodiark, which is precisely what happens in the end. So this begs the question, why are we even here? Okay, obviously it's because this is a game and they need to throw us some boss fights to spice things up. That's fine, that's great, but narratively speaking, our character has no point being here. Let's recap real quick. After we beat Zodiark into submission, Fendaniel boasts about using us to finish off the primal for him, only to pierce himself and deliver the killing blow. We do not unalive Zodiark. We had no intention to unalive him from the very start, and Fendaniel would have known this. He knew Zodiark's death would spark the final days. He knew the Watcher and Hydaelyn wanted to stop this from occurring for that reason. The same reason why we stopped our assault when the Watcher announced they're ready to reseal the primal following our fight. Fendaniel is well aware nobody else in the collective FF14 multiverse wants to see Zodiark destroyed, including the other Ascians. So why would he set up a plan like this knowing we would never follow through on it? Any which way you try to look at it, Fendaniel will be left to finish off Zodiark himself, which again, he does, which means our inclusion in this fight is completely unnecessary. There is no sound reason, narratively, for it to be happening, which in turn only succeeds in making our villain here look dumb. Even dumber than using the whiniest shitebag NPC in the whole series for a host, kinda dumb. All to facilitate a fight that has no reason for occurring. And believe me, this isn't the only time this happens in this particular expansion. Look, it's important in any story that your characters, antagonists included, have some level of cohesion for us the viewer to understand them. If they do not, their conduct only appears senseless and inept, and makes them out to be a joke because their situation they're in is factually a joke. What they're doing is nonsensical. Fendaniel has no reason to be in this situation given his stated desires. If his goal was to first beat us down and remove any chance of us finding a solution to the final days, he fails miserably. He's still an incompetent sore loser, possessing the body of an incompetent sore loser. And yes, I will continue to rip on Asahi because it's the only thing entertaining about his character. Outside of him dying, of course. That was great. But to further my point, take what else he says right here.
My sole regret is that you live to tell the tale.
Okay, what does that mean? No, really, what does that mean? The goal was to have us kill you. Obviously, we're going to live through this. Unless, what, we kill you, then you kill us before we finish killing you? That is dumb. So what, does he need us to do most of the work before finishing off Zodiark himself? Why would we even assume that? Why would that be the case given how OP Zodiark is supposed to be? Besides, triggering the final days was the whole point. It's what we've been leading up to this whole time. The Warrior of Light will still die in abject horror in the catastrophes to follow, and will suffer far more this way, so Fendaniel is still getting precisely what he wants in the end. This lamenting not killing us runs contrary to his entire plan. If it's meant to be some empty boasting and smack talk, it's wasteful and confusing, which only draws more attention to the character's ineptitude, especially in tandem with all the other issues we've been discussing here. Maybe we can argue plays into Fendaniel being deranged and emotionally unstable, but regardless of intent, he's still portrayed as clueless. The desires and behaviors here are not aligning at all. This is just another example of our victory being a colossal miscalculation. It not only elevates the Warrior of Light to an insane level that we have no right to be at given our development, it also paints a principal character, an antagonist, as a fool who was never a real threat in the first place. Sure, it was a decent twist that Zodiark's destruction would reignite the apocalypse was a swift kick to the nethers, but the devil is in the details, and the details here are on par with the schizophrenic's Rorschach test. It's hilarious that Fendaniel acts like this is all part of an elaborate scheme, while the writers still have us win the fight, appearing as an unstoppable badass, unaffected by the anarchy we just ignorantly unleashed onto the world. It's a huge conflict of tones, making both the horror we're meant to experience and our characters' indomitability lesser as a result. I can't even presume how the game wants me to feel right now. There's too much contradicting stimuli. Should I be horrified that the apocalypse is beginning? Take this scene after Zodiark perishes, where we see the planet shrivel up and die. It is incredibly unnerving, but I'm still standing victorious against the odds. At this point, the warrior is practically invincible. Until we aren't, that's a rant for later. It's difficult to soak in the seriousness of the matter while simultaneously being raised to new heights and exemplified to such a high degree. I don't feel terrified at what horrors may follow. How can I? We just did this. But hey, you know what? The end of the world is still starting, just like the baddies wanted. My plot armor and I shall tend to the matter shortly. Right after this lengthy comedy sketch with these remarkably incompetent bunny people, Conflict of Tones Part 2. Now, don't get me wrong, I still think this is almost a good idea. The concept and build-up were spot on, as far as I'm concerned, if just a few details were altered. Let's paint a slightly different picture here and see how it helps. Imagine if we had lost that fight. Zodiark is simply too powerful. We're beaten back in the following cutscene, bloody and broken. Fendaniel marks our efforts, reminding us of what just sort of being we're measuring up against. Us, the shallow hero of a broken and fragmented world, has failed. He prepares the final strike and impales himself. This is where we learn he never cared about killing us. Zodiark's destruction was the end goal, beating us to a bloody pulp with just an entertaining distraction. With his death, the final days will begin, and with our powerlessness to stop even him, incomplete and insufficient, as Fendaniel puts it, what hope have we against the world's end? You see, here we have the luxury of Fendaniel imposing his melancholia. The sadism of manipulating us to his own ends is still accomplished. He's portrayed as malicious and competent, which only redoubles our fear of the calamities, knowing we were bested in every conceivable way. We do not defeat an enemy we have no business defeating, no matter how you stretch it. And this sentiment follows us for the rest of the story. Every action we take here on out will trace back to this moment where we failed to stop this. All this mayhem and death from occurring. Doesn't that fit into the themes of Endwalker far better than, well, this? But apparently that was too much to ask for. Okay, so clearly the given explanations aren't going to cut it. Let's try brainstorming a bit and see if anything else in-game can better help us understand what happened here. A potential argument may lie in our ability to utilize the Dynamis, the same emotional form of energy that created the final days in the first place. It's been proven to be a very esoteric power, as Hermes himself describes it, allowing us to surpass conventional feats of strength. The limit break system is itself implied to be a testament to what feats the Dynamis may permit us. And I'll admit, Dynamis is a fascinating concept. The few phenomena we see throughout Ultima Thule and through the Gatherer Beast Tribe questline present some fascinating possibilities as to its applications, outside of causing apocalypses and perpetual depression at least. But as of now, Dynamis is still remarkably obscure, as are its abilities and limitations. Since 6.0 ended, the concept has barely been brought up at all in MSQ, so it's unclear when, if ever, we'll get some more exposure, so we may further explore its nature. More importantly, we need to consider that we do in fact lose fights and get overpowered and show ourselves weak with limitations. So it's obvious that Dynamis is not an absolute ability. I like the notion that it can make us an exceptional force, especially when in tandem with our ability to use ether. Without some kind of rule set, some means of gauging it, this argument can be easily and terribly abused. Imagine any time we lose a fight here on out. What is the argument going to be? The Dynamis made us lose? Hey, just stop listening to emo music, we'll be invincible. And what if we win absurdly so, just like we did with Zodiark? Did we just have enough positive vibes to save the day on this occasion? Like I said, it's a fascinating concept, but one littered with inconsistencies that makes it a not so reliable explanation. Also, keep it in mind, folks, previously we had fought both Emitselk and Elidibus, two characters easily dwarfed by the Elder Primal, and we struggled against them. We never would have beaten Emmet without the Scions backing us up. We may never have bested Elidibus without Grahatia using the Crystal Tower to capture him. So where was the Dynamis' Super Saiyan power-up in those fights? Why did we struggle with these objectively much weaker opponents, but not Zodiark? The Asm Crystal was applied in the Elidibus fight too. Even it has never been shown to bridge a gap of this level. And timeline-wise, there is not a significant enough gap between Shadowbringers and Endwalker to explain this. So, unless we've had some major behind-the-scenes training arc when the servers were down for maintenance, which would be mighty whimsical if nothing else, that's a hefty level jump to shrug off. So, look, I know it's easy to cling to whatever convenient argument you can think of. This is especially true in an RPG where gameplay is naturally the focus, more than story. The Dynamis gives us the edge, Zodiark is incomplete, etc. The problem remains that without an objective, more consistent frame of reference, there is no way to maintain such a standard in the long run. Something will eventually, inevitably, contradict it. And your only option then is to ignore all the irregularities and accept whatever is happening as the new status quo. And then change it again the next time there's a contradiction. It's mediocre, it's insulting. We can aspire better than this. FF14 has on many occasions given us unique and complex obstacles to overcome, as well as unique ways of combating those issues. I am sure everybody you ask can think of a few solid examples of the game having us work our way to victory, rather than having it handed to us like some kind of participation trophy. Previous expansions have demonstrated beautiful ways of building up our strength that are not only sound and reasonable, but play into the larger narrative of the story as well, which makes it doubly confusing why they couldn't afford to send courtesy to Zodiark of all things. These struggles were so beautifully handled, in fact, that they are topics better suited for their own videos. Any number of explanations could have satisfied better than his cheap throwaway line, if only an effort had been made. But the writers couldn't be bothered. and instead expected us, the players, not to put much, if any, critical thought into the matter. Do you understand what I mean when I say situations like this are insulting? By now, we are getting very desperate for explanations. Every idea we've explored just exposes even more issues. But hell, what's one more? So, perhaps Zodiark had expended a great deal of his power halting the final days and rejuvenating the planet after the apocalypse. Another substantial sacrifice was required to heal the planet following the final days, after all. Between that, the fact he was still barely halfway complete, and his millennia imprisoned could account for why we were able to best him. Alright, I gotta be honest here, this is some heinous stretching on my part, enough to make a yoga enthusiast envious in fact. All in some vain attempt to make sense out of something the game couldn't be bothered to itself. And after that piss-poor throwaway line, the steamrolled right past the fight awfully fast. In fact, they were so disinclined to explore the fight's outcome that the whole event is basically swept under the rug and immediately forgotten about. I found it bizarre that our victory is barely ever brought up in game, apart from the consequences of Zodiark's destruction. Frankly, everybody's jaws should be hitting the floor and ricocheting back up over their heads after what happened here. Just imagine one of the Unsundered watching this fight. Emmett Selk would have lost his collective crap, and then magicked up some more just to lose that too. But none of that happens. There's no deep diving into it. No one is taken aback to the point of breathlessness, which would be a very appropriate response. It's an amazing spectacle the game threw in to stoke us up a bit, then disregarded and virtually forgotten about, like any other piece of content this game has created over the years. Such a monumental accomplishment thrown haphazardly to the wayside. Can anyone guess why the writers would do such a thing? Understand, it's not that this sort of explanation can't work. A multitude of reasons could satisfy where one alone does not. But the problem remains that the story itself couldn't be bothered to, instead throwing us a lousy explanation nobody with a shred of critical thinking would accept. And by now, we've officially put far more work into justifying this than the writers did in the first place. Look, whatever your personal thoughts are on this fight, it isn't a good sign when the players must make sense out of such implausible events, because the creators themselves did not. Especially an event like this, which puts us on a whole new level of power, a level the series will likely struggle to validate moving forward. But that too is a topic for another time. Perhaps if the fight had been arranged differently, we could better see the potential in this. Instead of having Zodiark's awakening lead into the second phase of the fight, it could have been put at the tail end instead. Make it something like a final counter we need to overcome or the whole raid wipes, beating Zodiark into submission before his full power is unleashed. That way, we still have the luxury of defeating the Primal without downplaying its power. We could have had the best of both paths with a little forward thinking. Or, alternatively, had this rationale been used with, say, a single 1/14th fragment of Zodiark, then defeating it wouldn't be such an overwhelming stretch. But in hindsight, that's ridiculous. No way after this happened would they present a single Zodiark fragment as a threat in any context. Am I right? Everything we've been discussing gives me the impression that this section of the story was rushed out as quickly as possible. Hence the half-assed explanation and subsequent dismissal of Zodiark being anything remotely important. Given all the hype and build-up over the years, can we really argue that's a proper send-off for this literal manifestation of the star and nature itself? And that's the crux of it, folks. The developers had a monumental obstacle at their disposal, a powerhouse nigh incomprehensible that could have been utilized to enforce the main theme and idea of this game: tragedy, terror, hardship, and the perseverance to continue despite it all. Outside of perhaps the end singer itself, Zodiark was the single greatest asset to bring this theme to life for our character, the avatar through whom we experience the world and its ideas. His dominance over us would have been the perfect tone to set the rest of the story. It would also force us to consider alternate means to see the day saved, as compared to copious amounts of stabbing and/or explosions. That too is a compelling mindset better in line with the narrative, as well as our rather ingenious cast of main characters. And the search for other avenues of strength would have been an ideal lead-in to introduce and explore the Dynamis. These few deviations discussed barely scrape the surface of how else Zodiark's finale in the series could have been carried out. Instead of treating him as the big deal the first Primal rightfully was, he was thrown in for a mandatory trial run, beaten down and justified via a terrible argument nobody should buy into, then forgotten about so that the rest of the narrative could play out as the writers evidently desired. And everything associated with Zodiark becomes cheaper as a result. The Ascians can't be that big a deal, how can they be? We just did this to their god. The trials and horrors the ancients must have endured before resorting to sacrificing half the world to create this primal to save them. Pfft, Who cares? We single-handedly delivered 57%, the level of whoop-ass half the ancient world's collective power could muster. Need I go on about how disappointing all this is? When Shadowbringers revealed what Zodiark truly was, it struck me as intended to be a larger-than-life concept, something we were never meant to interact with, not directly at least, and certainly not like this. Endwalker chose to serve him up as cheap fodder to fuel spontaneity more than enhance the story, and the final product is this sensation of being robbed of such boundless opportunity. Well, first off, if you made it through the entire video, then thanks very much. I know there's better things to do than listen to some disgruntled nerd on the internet rant about their upheavals, like there's a shortage of that these days. I am aware that my opinions may be in the minority here. Many people seem mesmerized by Endwalker's storyline. Wish I could say I was one of them. To be frank, there were too many issues that had me going crazy these last couple of years. And voila, here we are. This rant is part 1 of a miniseries meant to critique Endwalker. Zodiark, although a major faux pas, is hardly the only issue. And this video isn't everything I have to say about him either. Part 2 will tackle more of his shortcomings and lost narrative value as a result, as well as our inconsistent power scaling throughout the series, Endwalker included. Depending on how that goes, Part 3 will review instances throughout 14 where the warrior flight overcomes the odds in far superior manners. Not just compared to Endwalker, but also that. Because despite all my griping here, this game has had some phenomenal stories and trials to overcome, and they do deserve their share of recognition. These examples can help us better see where the issues may lie, as well as what we can learn from them moving forward. I can't pretend to know what this channel might become. Honestly, I'm just some nerd that had to get his thoughts out, so let's just go for it. See what happens. Like and subscribe if you're interested. Ciao for now.